Hello everybody. So today I want to begin to get into the nitty-gritty of the coronation ceremony and begin to talk about the symbolic purpose of the ceremony itself. I'm going to take the individual elements of the ceremony one by one and break them down and look in detail at their meaning. April's issue of my magazine The Antiquary is now available. Articles this month are on dubious princesses, caves, girdles and Dick Turpin the Highwayman. Thanks to all my readers and subscribers for your kind support. Purchasing The Antiquary magazine helps support this channel directly. Follow the link above if you would like to subscribe or purchase the latest copy or any back issues. Having arrived in the abbey and processed along the nave and into the choir and then to the sacrarium, when the sovereign arrives in the sacrarium, they first make a solemn bow before the high altar, the altar on which Holy Communion will be celebrated as part of the coronation ceremony. The altar represents the presence of God within his temple. Then the sovereign goes to the chair of estate, which is placed on the south side of the sacrarium, where, if this is a coronation of the king, the queen is already seated. The sovereign then kneels in prayer at a faldstool that's placed there, while the peers who have carried the various parts of the regalia in the procession, and the bishops who have carried the chalice, paten and Bible in it, present these items piece by piece to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is stood before the high altar. The Archbishop takes each item of regalia and hands it to the Dean of Westminster, who then arranges it upon the high altar, with St Edward's crown placed in the very centre. The imperial crown is not among those items borne in the procession and placed on the high altar, as it has already been placed in St Edward's chapel in readiness for the king's departure at the recession at the end of the service. After the regalia is placed upon the high altar, the king, the sovereign, rises from the chair of estate and moves to the coronation theatre for a ceremony that's called the recognition. This is a very ancient part of the ritual of the coronation that probably dates back to Anglo-Saxon times and is already included in the rite in the Liber Regalis, the coronation ritual of the 14th century. Although the sovereign today moves to the theatre for the recognition so that he can be better seen, in times past the king has simply remained standing before his chair of estate. The purpose of the recognition is for the sovereign to be presented to the political establishment of the country, those who have secular and spiritual power in the land, and for them to formally recognise him as the rightful sovereign and assent to his hallowing, his anointing as the king by the clergy. In times past, the political establishment, the ruling class, meant the nobility of England, the peerage, and the episcopacy, the bishops. Since the time of Magna Carta in the early 13th century, English kings have to a large degree ruled through the consent of the nobility. At times, particularly in the 14th and 15th century, they have also been toppled by the nobility. The coronation was often the first time in a new reign that all the nobility came together, and it was the first time they had the opportunity to consent to a new sovereign's rule. However, for many centuries, the recognition has really been no more than a formality, for the succession to the British throne has been governed by a strict set of conventions. These were established formally by the Act of Settlement in 1701, which stated that the British throne could only be inherited by a Protestant descendant of King James I. And the ruling elite have already consented to the accession of the sovereign way before the coronation at the Accession Council, which is held just after the demise of the previous sovereign. The coronation doesn't actually make the king the sovereign, it simply hallows him for the office. However, The recognition still takes place, and it is the Archbishop of Canterbury's job, as the man who will hallow the king, to seek the approval of the assembled company, and he is supported in doing so by 4 of the great officers of state: the Lord High Constable of England, the Lord Great Chamberlain, the Earl Marshal, and the Lord High Chancellor stand behind him as he addresses the assembly. The Archbishop addresses the assembled company 4 times, facing towards the 4 compass points: east, to where the bishops are assembled next to the high altar; then south, where the royal dukes and peers are seated; west, towards the choir; then north, to the peeresses. He addresses them in words that have little changed since at least the reign of Charles I. Sirs, I here present unto you Charles, your undoubted king. Wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same? Then the ruling class give their assent. In the Liber Regalis, the consent was given directly with an affirmative "so be it," which was then followed by the exclamation "God save the King." The "so be it" has been dropped since at least the early 17th century, and "God save the King" is now sufficient to signify their assent at the recognition, with a trumpet fanfare after each exclamation. We know that in May the Westminster Abbey will no longer be filled with peers of the realm, as it was even at the coronation of Elizabeth II in 1953. The peers, as I've stated in other videos in this series, no longer have a role politically. They are no longer a power in the land. We don't know at present who will be seated in the transepts that were once filled with the peers and peeresses and will witness the recognition. Elected politicians? Foreign royals? Visiting dignitaries? The 400 British Empire medal recipients? The bishops of the Church of England will probably be seated on the north side of the sacrarium as they have been in times past. Only some of the people seated in the abbey, recognising their sovereign, will wield any real political power. You might question if there's any point in keeping the recognition in the coronation ceremony, given it will no longer serve either a direct or even any notional symbolic function. During the coronations of the 20th century, directly after the recognition, the sovereign returned to the chair of estate. But in times past, the sovereign proceeded first to the high altar, where the first offertory was made, an offering of a pall, an altar cloth of gold, and a wedge of gold weighing a pound. In the 20th century, this offering was moved to later on in the coronation ceremony, and I will consider its importance then. In the late Queen's coronation in 1953, the recognition led immediately into the swearing of the Coronation Oath, and I assume that will also be the case in May. Now, I'm not a constitutional expert, and I'm sure there are better people to talk about the Coronation Oath, its evolution, and its constitutional importance than me. In my understanding, the coronation rite is a series of transactions that take place between the sovereign and his people. In the recognition, the people agree to support their undoubted sovereign, and the oath is the sovereign's reaction to that, in which he then makes an agreement with his people. The sovereign has sworn a type of oath at English coronations since Anglo-Saxon times. An 11th century copy of the oath written by St Dunstan in the 10th century survives in the British Library, and in it the Anglo-Saxon kings promised that the Church of God and all the people would hold true peace under his rule, that he would forbid acts of robbery and iniquity, that he would uphold justice and mercy in all judgments. From the later Middle Ages until the coronation of James II in 1685, this basic pattern of oath was kept. The king promised to confirm the laws and customs of his predecessors, to confirm the laws and customs and privileges granted to the church by St Edward the Confessor. He was to swear to keep peace in the church, to exercise law and justice in mercy and truth with good judgment, and to keep the laws and customs of the commonalty, the commons and nobles of England held by right. Directly after making these promises, one of the bishops, not the Archbishop of Canterbury, got up and asked the king to pardon the clergy and to grant and preserve to the clergy the privileges they previously had. And the king responded in the affirmative. Even in the later Middle Ages, the oath recognised that the King of England ruled by consent and that he was not an autocrat, that his position came with power, but the power came with responsibilities to protect the realm and the people committed to the king's charge. England has never taken kindly to autocratic kings. Even in the Middle Ages, as with Richard II, if the nobles of England found a king was not doing his job properly and was not protecting the common weal, they were not above deposing him. Henry VIII tried to have the Coronation Oath revised, and the Privy Council were tasked with redrafting it. In the British Museum, a copy of the original draft survives, but it has been altered by Henry's own hand to something that gave him more power and authority and would not constrain him and his successors to follow the law if they chose not to. The oath was never adopted, and until the late 17th century, the oath that is found in Liber Regalis continues to be used. A new coronation oath was written for the coronation of the joint sovereigns William III and Mary II, who came to the throne in 1688. The text was in fact made statutory in that year by Act of Parliament. William and Mary came to the throne in the midst of a real political revolution where power shifted hands. We usually call this revolution the Glorious Revolution. They came to the throne in really odd circumstances. Mary's father, James II, was a Catholic king. This caused political disarray and real fear in the country, fear that the country would be plunged again into religious instability. Mary and her husband William, the Prince of Orange, were invited by Parliament to invade, and when they did so, James II fled the country. Parliament declared he'd vacated the throne, and William and Mary were offered it, but on very strict terms. From here on in, Parliament had the upper hand when it came to authority, and as part of the deal, the new sovereigns would rule with Parliament's consent, and a new Bill of Rights, giving Parliament new sweeping powers, was brought into law. Parliament, as part of this process, brought forward the new Coronation Oath, and it sought to bind the sovereign from henceforth to rule constitutionally according to the law as agreed by Parliament. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 and this new political settlement is one of the reasons why Britain has retained a monarchy and other countries with former autocratic sovereigns have not. Our sovereigns have long reigned with consent. The Oath of 1688, this statutory oath, has been used at the coronation of every British sovereign since. Before delivering the oath, the Archbishop of Canterbury asked the sovereign if they were willing to take it before then proceeding. From the late Middle Ages onwards, the coronation oath has been taken by the sovereign while they've been seated in the chair of the state, still wearing their state robe and their cap of maintenance. There are now three elements to the coronation oath, three premises. These relate to the maintenance of good governance, of fair justice, and of the religious settlement of the church. In the first part, the Archbishop asks the sovereign if they will solemnly promise and swear to govern their kingdom according to its respective laws and customs, that they will not trample on the law but will govern with consent. The British dominions overseas that have the British sovereign as head have been mentioned in this part of the oath since the early 20th century. Then the Archbishop asked the king to swear that as the fount of justice in the land, he will cause justice with mercy to be executed in all the judgments he makes, all the judgments made in his name. The third part of the oath relates to the English religious settlement. In 2023, England still has an established state church, the Church of England, and the sovereign is the supreme governor of it. The Coronation Oath is clear that the Church of England holds to a Protestant Reformed religion. The sovereign swears to uphold that religion and the governance, discipline and worship of the Church of England. The sovereign secondly swears to uphold the rights and privileges of the clergy. We will not see a change to the oath for the coronation in May. The text of 1688 is still enshrined in British law and can only be changed by Act of Parliament. There has been some suggestion that those elements relating to the religious establishment should be changed, given that Britain is now a more pluralistic society. But until the time that the Church of England is disestablished, if ever, I can't see this happening. At present, such ideas of reform to the Coronation Oath remain just an academic exercise. At the end of swearing the three premises, the sovereign then rises, takes off their cap of maintenance, and then goes, with the sword of state before them, to the bottom step of the altar where they swear to the oath. They swear to the oath on a copy of the Holy Scriptures that is brought from the altar. The things which I have here before promised, I will perform and keep. So help me God, the sovereign swears, and then kisses the Bible. Since 1689, just to hammer home the importance of this contract, and as evidence of the promises the oath made, the sovereign is presented with a written copy of the oath on a silver standish, and they sign it. Once this transaction is over, once the sovereign has made a solemn contract with their people, it is time for the central spiritual part of the coronation to begin, the sovereign's anointing, their hallowing, their blessing by God. Thanks very much for watching.